In this lesson, we're going to look at the bass part. First thing you just need to kind of keep in your mind, this is kind of simple stuff, but when you're reading the score, you are reading the bass clef, and it is written different to the treble clef. So just to give you an indication of where we're at, this first note is an E. So this one here that I've got my mouse over, is an E going on to a G. Okay, so that just gives you an indication of how to read that. The rhythms are really interesting. You have to be really careful. If you're inputting this, you have to be really careful. And you have to pay attention to the articulation and the way that the bass player is phrasing them. And it's a really nice part. If you listen to the actual track and just listen to the bass, it's actually driving the piece quite extensively. Now, one of the problems I have with this track is just getting the appropriate sound. It's a really muddy, dirty bass. In most rules of thumb, you tend not to add too much reverb to bass instruments like bass drums and bass guitars. But for this one, I have actually added quite a bit of reverb just to dirty up the sound a little bit. And that's kind of given me kind of what I want. And I'll show you the settings that I've got for my sound in a minute. Remember again, we're in G sharp minor, so remember just to kind of keep in mind that they are all sharps apart from the B and the E. And let's have a look at this. So the phrasing that I've used for this first part in the pre-chorus, now I just zoom in, you'll see where the actual bass part happens. So it starts in the pre-chorus and it pretty much goes all the way until the end of the track, just with this little break here. The phrasing that I've used is I'm accenting the first beat of, well, I'm accenting the beat, sorry. So if you notice that this note, 1, 2, 3, 4, is louder than the offbeat. So as it goes da-dum and falls onto the beat, this first note is slightly quieter and it just gives me a bit more of an accent. It's also slightly shorter. So I've made that, let me just zoom out so you can see that. So I've made this slightly shorter. Now, you may not want to make it shorter in this first phrase because it's such a dirty part. I tend not to roll my bass notes into each other, but because it's so dirty, you might think to yourself, actually, it sounds better if I just extend this note so that it rolls into the next note. You don't really want to overlap, but you might want to kind of go over. And that's what I've done with this second part. So I'm kind of doing a compare and contrast just to see which one I prefer, and I'll make my final decision a bit later on. But for now, I'm just kind of looking at this, shortening the note that leads onto the beat and making this one ever so slightly quieter, just so that we give a bit more emphasis to the notes that are on the beat. All of these parts are written, but I will share my screenshots. One thing you will need to kind of keep in mind is the levels. Now, my initial level set, if I bring this back here, is relatively low, but it does change. So I've had to use automation to kind of balance this up. So this first part is going to be louder than when it goes into the chorus. I've just brought the chorus down ever so slightly, and then I've brought it up again throughout the rest of the piece until it gets back to this chorus. And I might change this last chorus depending on how my track starts to pan out. But it was very necessary for me to bring the chorus down because it started overpowering where some of the vocals were going to go and some of the other instruments were going to kind of sit. The bass parts tend to be dead center in the mix, so just keep that in mind as well. There's not, I haven't heard any panning, but if you hear panning, obviously you've got to go with your own views on that. And as said, let me just get rid of this. As said in previous lessons, one thing I would definitely do for you guys is loop each of the parts, listen to the track as you kind of go through it, and then compare and contrast. It's a really good port of call, especially if you've spent the time in synchronizing your track to the actual grid. It's a really good port of call to actually use the track to that benefit, so you actually kind of hear where all the rhythms fall. There are a couple of changes, not many. The score seems to be fairly accurate. So that being said, let's have a look at what I've got so far. So let me just mute this track and I'll play my bass part on its own, then I'll play it with my track just to see what you guys think, and then maybe we'll reference a track as well. Okay, so let's just reference there, see what you reckon.
With every step we take, Kyoto.
So as you can hear, it's quite a dirty bass. It's not clean by any means, and it's quite low down in the field as well. And I'll show you how I've dealt with how it's low in just in a second. So here's my bass with the track. And as you can hear, that's not too bad. So those are my general settings. Let's just go over to the ES2 and see what I've done here. So I've started off with this classic synth bass, and it's fairly easy to get to. If you just use the drop down, you can see under bass synths, and then it's this first one, classic bass, this third one, classic synth bass. You should definitely try out some of the others just in case you prefer them. The initial sound does need a bit of tweaking. Some of the things that I've done here then, you can see this is the oscillator, and we're only using oscillator 1. You can see that by this bit here. This here is a mixing console, so it kind of, depending on where you've got it, it will mix the oscillator. So now it's only using oscillator 2, now it's only using oscillator 3, and now it's only using oscillator 1. And if you want to balance them, you kind of just work out the percentage that you want to use. So we've got a sine wave, let me just get that in the center, and we've dropped the octave down an octave, and that's how we're getting that sub-bass feel. The only other thing that we've done here is we've looked at the attack. The attack was set quite low, and it was giving it kind of this kind of pop as it went in. So in order to get rid of that initial pop, because I wanted it to sound a little bit more smooth, I had to kind of raise the attack ever so slightly and just adjust some of these other parameters. I will share this with you. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the bass part. So if you get that in now, and I'll meet you in the next lesson.